Welcome everybody to our podcast. Today I'm joined by Chris Burton. Chris has been a coach for the last 15 years, working with leaders across a wide range of business sectors, and also is a qualified coach supervisor. He's particularly interested in helping teams transform their performance and has done research into what differentiates high performance teams, and this is today's topic. Before becoming a coach, Chris worked with Mars as a European sales director and managing director in Mars businesses in Ireland, Taiwan and South Korea. Chris now lives near Oxford, has 4 grown-up children, and when he has time, enjoys cycling in beautiful places and climbing mountains. Welcome, Chris. It's a real pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thanks very much, Trayton. Great to be here.
Let's get straight into it, if I may. So give me an overview of the teams you've worked with and sort of some of the things that you note about what makes great high performance teams.
That's a really interesting question because I work with leaders and teams, as do you. And if I think about the leaders I work with, quite a high percentage of those leaders are talented and high performing, I would say. So 30 to 40%. If I think about the teams I come across, I would say fewer than 10% I would categorize as high performing teams. And I do a thing, when I'm working with a team for the first time, I'll go around the group and say, Trayton, what's the best team you've ever been in? I won't do it to you live, but about a third of people say my under 11 hockey team or the like. Oh, we had fun. It was great. We won, we lost, we had great fun. About a third say one of my first career jobs was we were learning fast. We were making lots of mistakes. Things were going right, things were going wrong. It was really energizing. It was fun. And about a third of people sort of look at their feet and say, I don't really think I've ever been in a high performing team. So that, when you think about it, is a tragic waste of talent. And that really stimulates my interest in teams and team performance.
It's an interesting sort of observation. Why do you think that is? Why is it that teams, when you're working with great leaders, I guess mainly within large organizations, either public, private or not-for-profit organizations, so fairly large organizations, those leaders don't feel like they're working in a great team?
The inner game of tennis, and where it says, correct me if I get this wrong, is performance equals potential minus interference or something like that.
That's correct, yeah. Tim Galwin.
There you go. With one leader, there's only their individual interference, maybe. With a team, it's a much more complicated system. You've got lots of potential interference that can get in the way. So I think it's that. I think there's lots of stuff that gets in the way.
Yeah, okay. So when you do see high performance in that 10%, I think was the correct figure you said.
Yeah.
What is it that you see and observe when high performance teamwork is in place?
We've done some research into this area, and 6 things seem to stand out. I've written them down because I always get to number 4 and then I'll forget. But 6 things. Compelling purpose. So they're clear about what they're trying to do and they're engaged in what they're trying to do. So being clear isn't enough in its own right. So good examples: emergency teams, military teams, charities, World Wildlife Fund. Really compelling purpose.
Yeah.
Goals and roles, clear goals and roles, obvious to say, but if you and I are in a team, I have to be really clear what you're doing, what I'm doing, and we have to rely on each other. And if you think, the ultimate example of that, I often think is a Formula One team that changes 4 tires in 2.3 seconds or whatever.
Yeah, something ridiculous, yeah.
Third thing, strong capability and expertise. So they have to have the right skills, experience and expertise round the table or in the team to do what they're trying to do. So think surgical teams, think an Apollo mission control, something like that. Fourth thing, and I think in a way the most important, values and behaviors. They're the glue that holds everything together for me within an organization. And if that isn't right, doesn't matter how talented everybody is. And I think to your question a minute ago, that's often what goes wrong, the values and behaviors. Fifth thing, effective ways of working. So decision making, empowerment, communication. Love them or hate them, Amazon are pretty good at this stuff. And final thing, and I think a lot of teams don't do this, is proactive attitude to change. So a lot of teams can go quite insular and quite short term, rather than thinking, right, what might happen? How do we get prepared? How do we mitigate against what might happen? So 6 things: compelling purpose, goals and roles, capability and expertise, values and behaviors, effective ways of working, proactive attitude to change. Those for me seem to be the 6.
Yeah. And when you list them like that, it's not complicated.
It really isn't complicated.
No.
So it really isn't complicated.
What makes those simple principles difficult to execute to get high performance teamwork?
I think it's the values and culture piece. I think when I look at teams that aren't working, it's hardly ever capability and expertise. Most teams have smart people in them.
Yeah.
So I think it's 2 things, actually. I think it's that values and culture piece, and I think a lot of teams aren't really clear on the purpose, or the purpose might not be compelling to them, and they have too many goals. So you look at something that's in the news last week, HS2. Okay, why did that go wrong? Well, in a way, there were 2. They were thinking about cost and leveling up and time and politics and local communities and environment. It was just too messy. The purpose wasn't clear, and the goals and roles, and that's, I think, why it's sort of come off the track.
Yeah. But thank you for the pun.
Yeah.
There
you go.
That's very
I'm
good.
here all week.
Great. So, and it's interesting, as you're talking, I'm just reflecting on this, because like you, I work with a lot of teams, and I think for leaders and for teams, and we mustn't forget the other part of the equation, which is followers, right? Those team players.
Yeah.
That leaders lead. It's a complex and challenging world at the moment, and changing very rapidly. So have you seen a change, I guess, pre and post COVID in levels of high performance teams, or has it stayed consistent through that transition?
I think a lot of teams manage really well in a crisis, and COVID was a crisis, albeit a prolonged one. So teams can be at their best in a crisis because they just cut through all the crap, and they get stuff done, and they get organized, and they do things differently. So I think, actually, funnily enough, a lot of teams through COVID were at their best. Coming out of COVID, I think it's now much more difficult. Two reasons: hybrid working, different ways of working, and I think that will bed down over the next few years. And different organizations are taking different approaches to that, and that's all changing live. So I think, that's one thing. And the other thing is, a lot of people now post-COVID, I think, are looking at their lives, at their jobs, at their organizations, and thinking, reflecting, thinking, do I want to be here? Are these the decisions I want to make? So that plays into the whole leader follower thing as well. Are these leaders I want to follow now? So I think there's a lot going on post COVID, but teams tend to be good in a crisis because they get rid of all the extraneous, irrelevant bullshit, processes.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to your 6 elements, I guess in a crisis, there's a purpose and a vision and an output that's required. And teams will quickly, a bit like a project, it's not necessarily short term, but it's quite clear about what's going to be delivered.
Yes.
And teams can quite usually see that there's an outcome, there's a purpose, there's a why and a what. They can structure themselves around that. They bring in the skills, the capabilities. They create ground rules and ways of working. Let's call them values and behaviors. And they have sprints using project language that delivers on outcomes, so they can see progress. But when that I guess, that short-term project or that crisis is in place, then it comes more nebulous in the approach and focus and delivery of what the teams are achieving on a day-to-day, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what we're saying. And then if we can bring in some of what you're talking about, then that might give a focus for teams to maintain that high performance for longer. It's all about parity for me. So if I look at the best coaching work and the worst coaching work I've done, it's pretty much
Mm.
always contracting. If the contracting at the beginning is thorough and clear,
Yeah.
things tend to work well. If things are a bit more nebulous and a bit more, well, we'll see, and you're thinking things in your guts, telling you things like this coachee is not committed, or this boss is a bully, or whatever. That's when things go wrong. If you suppress what your gut is telling you, and you carry on. So contracting for me is uh, absolutely vital, and that comes back to the point you were making, about if you split it up into projects or work streams, or whatever you want to call it, that can really help.
Yeah. So I guess one of the complications with teams is that you usually join a team that's already in place. You never bring a team that's brand new like you would do with a project
Hmm.
or a task like going into your pleasures of climbing mountains,
Yeah,
where you say, okay, our task is this. We'll bring a team together. They meet for the first time. They get that clarity of not only how they're going to work with each other, but expectations and deliverables as a team and as individuals,
yes,
so clear role responsibility. In normal working life, if I can call that, you join a team that's sort of halfway up the mountain or sort of wherever it's got to, with people joining, leaving, and there's a lot of moving parts within the team, and the task of the mountain itself is being reset or
yeah.
repositioned with the change that's going on in organizations. So it becomes very complex for many.
It does, and I often I often use climbing Everest as an example of this, because if you think about bringing a team together on Mount Everest, there's normally two groups of people you're trying to bring together. So you're trying to bring together the climbers, who are professionals, relatively well off maybe, and they might be paying a lot of money to be there, and the Sherpa team, who are the sort of glue that hold it together and carry stuff up and down the mountain, and they might be getting $500 a year. So to bring those groups of people whose lives are actually depending on each other
Mm.
together and blend them really quickly in a team is just an incredible thing that happens. So that gives me a lot less patience, actually, when people say, oh, sales and marketing don't get on. Well, you know surely we can find a way of sales and marketing getting on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With the challenges they both face, and I guess what you're talking about here at a strategic level, or most levels actually within teams, stakeholder management. It's not
Yes,
only who's in the team, but also who those teams need to rely on for their own success.
uh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
some teams can be, you take an expedition team up a mountain, and once they get on the mountain, there aren't that many stakeholders, so it becomes more simple.
Yeah.
um HS2, back to HS2, what we were talking about, very difficult. All sorts of national, local, political, stakeholders. Very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I can seal that. And I don't know if you're aware of the work done by Peter Hawkins in the systemic approach to team
Yeah,
coaching, where he uses sort of mainly four areas. Looking at who are our core stakeholders and what are their expectations that we need to serve as a team. And understanding those expectations will then give us clarity as of a team about what we need to deliver for those stakeholders, but also
yes,
what that means for then how we work with each other,
yeah,
and the levels of performance and the deliverables. And then the other part, in the fourth element of his model, talks into how do we keep engaged with stakeholders. So those
mm,
four areas, which are all interlinked, and at the heart of that model is obviously how do we learn, how do we adapt, how do we
mm,
become more agile,
mm,
and get up the mountain or whatever the task is even
mm,
quicker.
mm.
Um, So yeah, I can see all those elements coming into what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and that means that, in working with a team and in coaching a team, I spend much more time on the setup, on that contracting, if you like, than I would with a one-to-one leader. So what I would try and do with a new team is have a one-to-one conversation with each of them. Start off with the leader, but then talk to all
Yep.
of them. And make that confidential, and what's going well, what's not going well, and that gives you a chance to get to know them all, and then they might say things that they might not in open forum.
Yep.
And what I do, I've got a questionnaire that I get them all to, a simple questionnaire based on the 6 characteristics that I just took you through, and I get them all to fill in that. There's about 30 questions, and then a 1 to 5 scale or whatever. And then in the first team session, you can play back to them, this is what you are telling me. And I find that's a very good way of establishing where the team is. Whereas if you're just with a new team and you're saying, right, come on, guys, tell me the challenges, and you're at the flip chart, well, they may or may not tell you the challenges. And probably they won't actually until about the second or third workshop. So I think that establishing the base and finding out what they're all thinking is critical.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've moved on to how do we do the team coaching. And if I may talk into the approach I take, which is very similar to you, Chris, is that exactly the same. I like to have a 45-minute, maybe an hour conversation with each individual. Before I do that, though, speak to the leader and understand what he or she would like to get out of the team coaching, and understand from their perspective what they feel are some of the challenges the team need to address.
Yeah.
And then speak to each of the individuals within the team to understand their perspective of the current situation and the reality of how the team are operating and some of those external factors. And I even ask, help me understand how the individual leads, that leadership style, does that help or hinder? And then when I've done that, like you, I aggregate all of that data, which then informs or refines the agenda that the leader wants to have within that event.
Mm-hmm.
And I contract like he did. And I also ask individuals to not only give me that, but just to share other facts they think might get in the way of the day or the session or the program that we're running. And then all of that aggregated data I share back. So no one knows who said what.
Yes.
But common themes, 3 or more people have said that. And what I find by doing that is that the team go, this is our agenda. This is not a coach or a consultant that's come in to force an agenda, and this is all relevant to us. And then, as you quite rightly say, you've got a real starting block to talk into. Not only that, you're sort of on the same page, if not ahead of them, because you know what's been said and where the conversation then might flow to.
Yes.
So that's certainly one of the things that I do when team coaching, and using those 6 areas or other areas that might emerge from some of the challenges or things that are working well, or some of those things that might be working less well.
Well, one thing I noticed, just building on that point, is I will share the results of the questionnaire that I get them to fill in, and say there's a low score on a particular question. I find that really then seems to give people freedom to say, oh, okay, I scored that low as well, and the reason I scored that low was because of this. So when they can see what the team is thinking, it does somehow give them that confidence, and the confidence to talk more, and to talk more openly, and to talk more deeply.
Yeah.
Very interesting with the team as well, because it sounds like we do it the same way. And there has to be an ongoing relationship with the leader and with the team members, between a series of workshops or interventions or whatever you're doing. And that's really, I think that's critical to the whole thing. But it's easy to get that wrong and be seen as a double agent by both sides. So I find that quite interesting. So you have to win the confidence of the leader enough so that in a workshop you can say, hey, Trayton, what makes you think that? Or hang on, that's not the same as what you said last time. Or so it's quite a subtle thing, and you have to really think on your feet. But it's all about how we work with leaders, I guess, about building that trust with them early, so that both sides think, both sides are not two sides, but that everybody thinks you're being fair and straightforward, and any challenge is with good intention. You're doing it. You're not doing it to point score or anything. You're doing it to move the team forward.
Yeah, it's certainly you say, there is a fine line, but it's for me, it's a success factor. Not when you're doing team coaching, it's not only the relationship you have with the leader, but the relationship you have with the whole team. And
Yes.
when I'm team coaching, it's very much, I'm in service of the whole team, and part of that whole team is the leader.
Yeah.
But if I'm seen to favor the leadership's view or opinion, then I can lose credibility with the team.
Yes.
And vice versa.
Yes.
So, I very much see myself when I'm coaching within a team as a team coach, and I would not coach separately the leader of that team or coach anybody within that team. And what I have seen, and some people may disagree, but I find it unethical practice and unprofessional practice, is where you find a team coach will be coaching the leader, coaching the team, and coaching a number of individuals within the team.
Yes, I think you're wearing too many hats there. I think that can't work.
So it's finding that balance where you are fair to all parties and being still the neutral observer with the objectivity. And although your allegiance is to the leader and to the team, making sure that's balanced.
And what I find as well is that when you're working with a team, quite often what happens is a sort of mirror of, the Tuckman forming, storming, norming, performing. So I quite often find a first workshop is brilliant and everybody is, oh no, that's where we are and that's what we need to work on. And, they go out all fired up. And then, the second workshop 4 or 6 weeks later, it can be a bit sort of, right, that wasn't as easy as we thought, was it? And, okay, now I know I said that, I've done that, but I haven't done that. And so I find that just like with that forming, storming, there can be a little dip.
Sure.
And then often, and that can knock your confidence as a new team coach. But then often, workshop 3, 4, or 5, there can be a big breakthrough. Yeah. But it's often it's interesting how often they follow a similar pattern. I don't know if you see that.
I definitely see that. And I sometimes see that when I'm doing on a one-to-one coaching, that the rapport and trust starts to build up. So they start to disclose more.
Yes.
And I guess the difference between an individual and team coaching is that as the teams start to disclose more, it's not just you as the coach that hears it.
Yeah.
Other members of the team hear it.
Yeah.
And they will react differently, to what they're hearing, and a level of honesty starts to come out. So you go through, as you say, that sort of honeymoon period, forming, and then you do get into that storming. But I find that most useful to help teams move on, to reset, going back to the conversation before, to reset the ground rules and expected ways of operating and those new norms that are needed for them to become a high performance team. And the other thing that I see, which is sort of fascinating for me, is when you first, and again, I don't know if you see this, Chris, when you first start out, members of the team will talk to you as the coach about someone who's in the room, whether that's good or not so good.
Yeah.
And I just say, well, Fred's in the room, just talk to them, and I actually sort of point, talk to them. So you see their heads then move over, but then when they've got another point, they come back and they use you as the sort of the conduit of that exchange.
Yes. Yes.
And what I notice as the team emerges, and this is for me a success factor, is then they start talking to each other and sort of ignore you because they know how to do that. And the team coach has encouraged and facilitated that level of openness and rapport with the team, with each other, rather than having to use you as the sort of the conduit.
And that's a great sign, isn't it? That's a sign of when you're getting somewhere, when you're involved less as a point man.
Yeah. And it gives I've had it where we come to teams where the team sort of push you out because there's no need for you.
Yes.
You're there just as just an extra person. We don't need you. And for me, that's a bit that Mary Poppins moment, right? We don't need you anymore, which is great.
Yes. No, I agree. And another thing I try and do with teams, that they've often got themselves into patterns of working on things, thinking about things, and what I try and do is to give them much more diversity in that way. So maybe using just a simple model like de Bono six thinking hats or something like that. So if the team is constantly, well, that will never work or whatever, you force them to wear the yellow hat and right, come on, tell me, let's have
Be
2 minutes
creative.
on positives on this or
Yeah.
and I find that can really work well used in lots of ways. So you can go through something linearly with a team, white hat, red hat, blue hat, whatever, or you get somebody who might be a bit of a black hat, and you say, right, Trayton, today for the next 10 minutes, you're just yellow hat, and you switch roles around, and they find that great fun. There's always a lot of laughs when you do that type of thing, but it just gets them to play in a different way. It's like a sports team playing a different pattern or moving from 4-4-3 to 4-4-2 or whatever. And sometimes that can be the magic dust that just moves them on.
Yeah, and I think not only great fun, but also introduces a different language
Yes.
into the team. So rather than say, "Oh, come on, you're being so cynical," and just sort of a no-sayer in this, which would be the black hat type of
Yes.
approach. You say, "Come on, let's forget that now. Put the yellow hat. Be more creative," and it gives individuals permission to challenge and switch. What the word I would use is identities.
Yes.
Of either the individual as a team. How do we identify with this problem? We can have a filter and look at it as a black hat, or we can filter it through a yellow or red, or whichever hat was appropriate, and giving teams just a different perspective and permission to do that in a fun way.
And a starting point, a great starting point I always find is with that de Bono white hat facts. So you say to a team, well, we're struggling with this thing, what are the facts around it? And hardly ever will they give you facts. They'll always give you opinions, and you have to gently push back. Trayton, that's an opinion. That's not really a fact. Tell me the facts.
And I guess that links to the first point you made, Chris, is why only 10% of the teams you work are really high performing, because there's a lot of subjectivity, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of non-factual data within the conversations and the situation that they're dealing with. And it's really interesting, because you just made me think that a lot of the high performing teams that I work with, they work from a very much a fact basis. And although they're uncomfortable with knowing the facts, they're comfortable in talking into it and finding the right factually insightful decision that they need to make from that. Which gives them that clarity of direction, and just having that sort of conversation gives people an understanding of not only the what but the why. They've got facts to support the why.
Yes.
An intellectual level, not necessarily an emotional level.
Yes. Another model, and I don't always just use models, but another model that sometimes works is bell bin, just doing a really simple bell bin with people, because that gets them to really understand their colleagues in a very simple way, and you can do it very quickly. And again, that can give them a shared language. Usually a few of them have come across it anyway. And you can then look at them as a team and see, where their strengths are in a bell bin type way. And often they will then join the dots themselves. They'll go, that's why we can never get anything done. We've got so many shapers in the team, and
no one's resourcing it. Yeah, we can't get the resources.
Nobody's resourcing it.
Yeah.
So I think again that can be that can give them a light bulb moment, actually, where they go, oh, no wonder we can never see eye to eye, where we both think the other's mad, because we're just coming at it from completely different directions.
Yeah, I've used de Bono in the past. I must admit, I haven't used that recently, although it's a proven model. And as you say, just to give people understanding about where their preferences or the roles they like to undertake informally within the team. The other tool that I sometimes use is psychometric, whatever psychometric people want to use, whether that's Insights, Lumina, whatever tool people use. And I find that very powerful in helping people understand about why they do what they do in the way they
Yes.
do it. So their
Yes.
preferences.
Yes.
And again, by bringing you, most of them have colors, or if you use MBTI, then obviously,
Yes.
the different letters. But it gives people then another language to say you're being very red there, or actually we need to be more blue here, and more
Yes.
analytical, and think this through rather than feel it through.
Yes.
So again, other tools like that I find useful for giving teams as a language and a framework just to understand what's going on within
Yes.
their own system, when they
Yes.
work with each other.
Yeah. That's interesting actually, because I think our work is all about giving them lenses to look through. And so sometimes I'll again start by getting them all to bring along a team that they think is a high performing team or a struggling team, and we pin them all around the room, and we get everybody talking about their chosen teams, and that works on lots of levels, I think, because if somebody brings the All Blacks, like I might, and they say, oh,
Yeah.
it's all about culture and passion and fairness and belonging, and you learn a lot about that person from that. And again, I think that can be great, because that gets them to really step back and see a very big picture. And so then you leave the picture on the wall, and you can always come back and say, well, what would the All Blacks do? Come on, Chris, what would the All Blacks do if they were faced with this situation?
Nice question.
How would they handle it? And you can do the same for struggling teams and think, right, what's going on? Ryder Cup 2 weeks ago. You compare the two sets of players, they're pretty much the same, aren't they? Give or take.
Yep.
1 or 2%. But crushing win. What's going on? What's going on there? It's all about, I think, values and passions and behaviors and cohesion. So there's lots of different directions to come at this from.
And it's interesting. You're just trying to link the two bits together here with what makes a great team. And you mentioned those 6 elements, and then bring along great teams, and we pin them on the wall. It seems to me that most people know what a great team should look like, how a great team should operate, and what it's like what they'd like it to be within a working great team. But from what you said, very few teams are able to achieve that.
Or so achieve it consistently.
Consistently. Okay. Yeah. So I guess this curiosity keeps coming to the fore for me about, why is that? Why is high performance teamwork so difficult?
Well, in one way, it's easy, because let's assume for a moment my model is more or less right, which I think it is.
Yeah.
So you've got six things. You have to have all those 6 things going right at the same time. So if one is not right, then the whole thing. Then the whole thing.
So all
fails.
the 6 things from your perspective are interlinked, they
have to work. It's no good having clear goals, but you haven't got the capability and expertise to do what you're trying to do.
Right. Okay.
So all 6 things have to be in place at the same time, and they have to operate in this complicated world of stakeholders, and changing conditions, and people coming in and out of the team. And it only takes one person coming into a team. So again, you look at sports teams. They go on a blinding run. They can't lose, and then suddenly something changes and they can't win.
Yeah. And you see that a lot in sport. Yeah.
A lot in sport.
Yeah.
So I think it is simple on one level, but it's always thinking ahead, right? Because I think some people think you go through forming, storming, norming, performing, and then you start performing forever. We all live happily ever after. Well, it doesn't happen like that.
No.
And you have to work really hard at performing to stay there.
Yeah.
And that means changing stuff. That means, doing that 6th habit of looking ahead, thinking what might go wrong, what might get in the way of our performance, how we're going to tackle that, how we're going to bring in new people successfully, how we're going to let people go at the right time, in a sensitive way.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, easy, but it's 6. It's not quite 6 factorial, but there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I guess with the current climate, there's so much change and moving parts and uncertainty. and we place into that those moving parts that sort of thing called emotion,
Mm,
anxiety,
mm,
fear.
mm.
So which, going back to your quote with Tim Galway, is that interference for teams, right? They
Mm.
got potential to perform, but that interference that is there, and that uncertainty which starts to kick in.
Yeah.
So knowing the world's changing, Chris, and there's a new world of work. Um, my view is leaders will need to lead in a different way.
Hmm.
How will teams need to operate differently, do you think, in this new world of work?
I think in this new world of work, anything is possible. So you can have as a team member anybody you want in the world because you can get them on a screen
Sure.
like this. So I think it's the fluidity and agility of teams that because we tend to have a very static view of teams, don't we? Right, we've got a management team, we've got 10 people on it, and that's going to continue until further notice.
Yeah.
Maybe a much more fluid um sense of team. So, for instance, with a project, you'd have a slightly different team, at each stage of the project process, and maybe we just need to think much more creatively
Yeah.
about teams in that way.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
one
I think you're
idea.
right. I think it's going to become more project orientated.
Yeah, I agree.
And you join a team, and then you leave a team. You join it. You can be a member of various teams.
Yes, and then
Um,
that's back to the clarity point that you were talking about, and you have sprints, and
yep.
that then brings you the compelling purpose and the clarity of goal and role that you need to maintain the urgency so you don't get into this nebulous status quo and then you start to lose a bit of momentum. And
Yeah.
so I
No,
think that's an important point. I think that might be that might be the future. And who knows, people are working from home a bit more at the moment. Some organizations are now pushing back on that, aren't they, and trying to get them back into the office. And I guess after 2 or 3 years we'll end up with many different solutions on that.
yeah, I think we're still, well, in simple terms, what's the best practice for hybrid? I think we're going to be emerging into what's best practice for teamwork or high performance teamwork, for example. Because all
Yeah.
these models that we've discussed are at least 40, 50, maybe 60 years old,
Yes.
and to some degree they're still valid. But what's the new thinking around high performance teamwork in this
Yes.
modern world?
Yes.
Um, yeah, so it's an interesting time
it,
for us.
it's it, I think it's a fascinating time, to be a coach and of any sort, but to be a team coach, because all the case studies you read and so on suggest high performing teams get more done with fewer people, with more engaged people, in less time, with fewer mistakes. So it's a goal worth going for.
Yeah,
It really is. I mean, Lencioni, one of the gurus of teams, his view, again some years back, was teamwork is probably the only remaining competitive advantage that hasn't been fully exploited. So
yeah,
it is an amazing time, I think, to be working with teams, and
yeah,
and to be in a team, because the technology now, as you were saying, means that infinite possibilities. You can be in multinational teams, global teams. You can be in more than one team. You can be in teams at different stages. I think the limitation really is just our own imagination.
yeah. And you mentioned Lencioni. I mean, it's one of my favorite books, Patrick Lencioni, Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and the different levels, with trust
Yeah.
right at the base of that,
Yes.
and leaders having to develop that trust within the team, and team members developing the trust within each other,
Yeah.
to enable that sort of collaboration to emerge and effective teamwork.
Yes.
Um, so I'm a great fan of that model,
Mm.
and it'd be interesting to see whether those, bit like the Maslow hierarchy of needs,
Mm.
which has stood its time over, whether the sort of Lencioni triangle with the trust and the sort of collaboration and performance and results
Yeah.
and all those good things will also be challenged as we go through.
Yes.
Um,
But it's hard to think that some of the absolute basics won't be critical. I mean, that trust has to be the core of
yeah,
everything, doesn't it? In a team without, and maybe you need more trust when you're just talking to people on screens, and you've got to find a way somehow, of getting that, of getting that trust. my youngest son, he started working during the pandemic, and they were all working on screens all the time, and it was so hard for them. I mean, their training was very good and da da da, but it was so hard for them to understand the culture of the organization that they joined, and yeah, easier for us who've been at it a while, but very hard to establish that,
Yeah.
over a screen, the culture, the values, the behaviors. Really hard. So, with any development comes challenges as well, but you have to think if you can start with that trust, everything is possible, and without it, I think pretty much nothing is possible.
Yeah, and I like your sort of, it's got me thinking actually that all of those things need to be aligned. And I guess we use the term high performing team. I guess a more appropriate term would be a functioning team that can deliver the results.
Yes.
Because sometimes low performing teams do deliver the results that are required by stakeholders.
Yes.
So it's having enough trust to be able to get the performance that's required. It may not be enjoyable, but the team works in a way that delivers the outcome.
Yes.
So,
That's a pretty
maybe,
low bar, though, isn't it? That's a pretty low bar. So if we all go home miserable every day while we're just about getting over the line, that's a pretty low bar.
well, I guess that wasn't my point. My challenge is that do all teams need to be high performing? And is that the right term?
Mm-hmm.
You could say as a team we function well. Does
Yeah.
that mean we're high performing? And what does functioning well mean
Mm.
compared to high performing?
Mm.
This is a
Mm.
bit like, there's an interesting article called "It's Not About the A players," and
Yeah.
this talks about in most organisations the B players, deliver most of the value.
Yes.
So as a functioning team, what's okay just to function, rather than be high performing?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's acceptable, but
Yeah.
what's sustainable for individuals in, as part of a team and the way they operate. And
I
I don't
mean,
want anyone to go home, not be happy, but it needs to be sustainable as well.
yes. Yeah, you're right, because a team has a purpose, but you'd want them for it to be sustainable, they have to get widgets out of the door in a way that doesn't make them all miserable, I guess. Otherwise, it isn't sustainable because they'll all leave or so
Yeah.
there has to be some element of doing something that matters in an efficient, productive way, and everybody has fun, not rolling around on the floor laughing fun, but fun, being inspired, energized while they're doing it. That's the other thing. Sometimes you're with a team and it's a bit flat and so on, and you go around the room and you say, hey, what do you do outside work? What and the team all do amazing things outside work. They run brownies groups and they volunteer for this and they do that and they run marathons and like somehow they come together and they're like, oh, they're sort of suppressed and yeah. So that's something we must try and get the best from people at work.
Yeah. And I think, it's got me thinking, this term we use, high performing team. Sometimes high performance isn't always achievable because, as we've said, all those moving parts, just the changing elements. And if
Yes.
it's about getting all those 6 points aligned, and we put a lot of effort, time, and energy into trying to do that, we never achieve it. That's quite demoralizing. But to
Yes.
say we want to be functioning and sustainable and enjoying what we do, that in a way creates a different mindset within the team.
Maybe that's better. I'm seeing a sort of Olympic rings thing of, functioning,
Well,
enjoyable.
there's a danger where you put elitism around teams, high
Mm.
performance teams, and
Mm.
I guess what sparked that thought was you saying only 10% I work with are high performing. Well, if you go to elite sports people, that's probably the same percentage, if not less.
Mm.
So is the term we're even using as team coaching, it's not about high performance teamwork. It's about getting teams to be able to function well enough to succeed
Mm-hmm.
in a sustainable way and in a way in which they enjoy it and are there to continue to succeed for the organization or the function team, whoever they're they're operating with.
Yeah, I agree. That term high performance is a bit sort of glib, isn't it? It's a bit sort of, yeah. And I think the direction our conversation was going in, give us another half hour, we could brainstorm something quite useful there, probably.
Yeah. And you used Everest, right? So I don't know how many people in the world have climbed Everest, but very, very few.
Yeah.
And you have to be quite elite as a climber with the money to fund it, whatever it is. It's certainly thousands.
Yes.
So, going back to the point about clarity, is the important bit is that what is it that we want to achieve as a team? What is that output or that we're being asked to? And can we function well enough to deliver on that output?
Without doing harm. Really interesting thing happens on Everest. So they on the last day they have to get up at 3 a.m. or whatever, and they aim to you have to turn around from the summit by, I think the unwritten rule is 1 p.m. because otherwise you can't get far enough down to survive the night. Got to get back to your highest camp. What often happens is people who have set up and have put the last 5 years into getting the money and the fitness and so on, they get summit fever. So they forget everything else. They just go to the summit, and people have died because of this. They get to the summit at like 3 p.m., 4 p.m. and they're exhausted and they can't get down and they die. And I think some organizations do that. So, if a team has a goal which they pursue to the exclusion of all else, and no matter what happens and no matter the casualties, I think some organizations get a sort of organizational summit fever as well.
Yeah, I see it all the time. And I think teams are so focused on the output of succeeding. And let's call it, the bottom line, let's call it profit or performance, that they forget about the other factors. Like the impact that has on people, on the team members. The impact that has on the environment and the way in which they achieve that.
Yes.
So, I've recently seen some videos and activities on Everest, and you look at the sort of summit, and it's just like a tip of gas cylinders, of sadly dead bodies that haven't quite made it. So, I think when we talk about high performance teamwork, and there is an edge of elitism there, and we need to achieve that no matter what else. Certainly speaking to you, Chris, it's got me thinking about, okay, what's sustainable, effective functioning teamwork? What's that look like? What's that feel like when you're in a team and you're still succeeding, but it's enjoyable and it's sustainable, and you want to continue to be better, that continuous
and it's sustainable growth. with lots of change.
Yes.
So again, back to sport. Not if you look at, for instance, Ferguson, he managed to morph about 3 or 4 really high-performing teams. Sorry, I'm using that phrase again. Together. Often what happens is a team goes through forming, storming, norming, performs for a couple of years, and then drops away. It's having that sustainability with new people coming into the team, people leaving the team. The purpose of the team may be changing a bit. The goals may be changing a bit. Really hard. It's really quite tricky, isn't it, to do that? Because you're not talking about sustainability, i.e. nothing changes. You're talking about sustaining back to my All Blacks. They have a core, they have beliefs, which seems to, I mean, they've had, a dodgy couple of years maybe, but it seems to, over the last 40 years, have given them sustained success.
Yeah. And
they sweep out the changing rooms afterwards. So they're humble as well.
It's very humble, and they're authentic, and I mean, it's high performance just inbred within the DNA, and it just happens, right? Well, the piece of going back to Peter Hawkins' model that I like, at the heart of that model is learning and growth. And you could argue, Sir Alex Ferguson with Manchester United kept on learning and building. And, going back to the Norman Tuckman model you speak about, is sort of forming, storming. There's constant storming going on because we're challenging each other, but we're comfortable to challenge. And with that challenge comes learning. With that learning becomes evolution.
I
which
think
it
that's a
creates
difference.
sustainability.
I think that's a difference. Elite sport, Monday morning, they'd be playing the videos back of the match, and they'd be going, right, let's look at the goal they scored. Right, Chris, you were too slow back. Trayton, you weren't marking your man. The feedback is very quick, very timely, and they just get used to it, don't they? They get used to looking at things they've done well and things they haven't done well, and they don't get terribly prickly about it. It just becomes a way of life.
Yeah.
And it's that normal teams, business teams, don't do as much because it's always a bit prickly, isn't it?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's difficult to have or give feedback to each other, right?
Yeah.
And where I've had the best success with teams that function really well is creating an environment where they're happy to give each other feedback and observations.
Yes.
And that becomes part of the norm.
Yes.
Not only how can I be better, but also how can I help the team be better and hold myself and each other to account.
Yes.
And that comes through creating that, going back to your point, there's sort of the values, the culture that you created, constantly learning and wanting to evolve, but at the same time being sustainable, but still delivering, year on, year out.
What a lot of teams that I find to start with, they attend, say, a leadership team with their functional hat on too much. There might be finance head, HR head, marketing head. And a lot of the work I do is to get them to wear that other hat, as your other hat is a team member trying to help the team achieve the overall purpose. And even if you're a marketing director, you might have to up the budgets because that's the greater good. And if you can get them to start thinking of these two hats they wear, I think that can help. That can help a lot.
Yeah. And I think there's two other hats that they should be wearing. Every team member needs to wear the leadership hat because they should be leading the team in a way for the organization, but also that hat of being a human being.
Yeah.
And being authentic, and understanding that not every team member can be elite all the time.
Yeah.
And support each other in a way which helps the whole team, to achieve.
Yes.
Chris, time's got the better of us, I'm afraid. But before I let you go, I have one question which I ask all my guests. And at Coaching Focus, our purpose is very simple. It's coaching for a better tomorrow. So from your experience, 15 years in coaching, what does coaching for a better tomorrow mean for you?
Yeah, I've thought about this. I've been thinking about this for a few days, and for me it's modeling the values and the behaviors we're going to need for a better tomorrow. So for me, those are things like fairness, respect for others, respect for the environment, collaboration, rather than competition, and courage to do some tough things as well as the easy things. That's what it means for me. And if we can model that, then I think that's leading us towards coaching for a better tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think as coaches, we have a duty to try and develop those great values and principles within our clients and within the teams that we work with.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Chris, it's a real honor. Thank you, sir. Always great and interesting to have a conversation with you. So thank you for your time.
You're really welcome. I enjoyed it too.